Exclusives have become the strong feature of the checkpoint since its launch not long ago. The next one is from the IMF. Our English language edition of BM.G has already provided you with the 5 points to watch for in 2021 from the IMF blog co-authored by the director of the Middle East and Central Asia Department, Jihad Azour. In this blog, Mr. Azour emphasizes what might be the most important while looking forward towards the recovery in the context of the region. First, weak oil demand and large inventories are likely to remain concerns for oil exporters, and while OPEC Plus agreements helped stabilize oil prices, these are expected to remain 25% below their 2019 average. Second, the threat of economic scarring, long-term losses to growth, employment and incomes is a key concern. In particular, as estimated by the IMF, 5 years from now, countries could be 12% below the GDP level expected by pre-crisis trends. What's more, for countries that depend heavily on the better tourism sector, both baseline GDP and employment could go down by 5 percentage points this year, with effects lingering over the next 2 to 5 years, while poverty could rise by more than 3.5% in 2020 if remittances do not rebound. Third, the pandemic will exacerbate the daunting challenges faced by fragile and conflict-affected states and could increase social unrest. Poor living conditions among refugees and internally displaced persons could also increase the risk of COVID-19 outbreaks. Fourth, in many countries, fiscal deficits and debt have increased by amounts not seen in 2 decades, leaving the region vulnerable to a resurgence of the virus given the likely increased spending needs and lower tax revenue. Rising deficits will also boost financing needs in the region by a median increase of 4.3% of GDP. And fifth, the crisis has also heightened corporate default risk and credit risk for banks in the region, with potential losses that could amount to $190 billion or 5% of GDP. For more on the economic outlook of Georgia and the region, the director of the Middle East and Central Asia Department, Jihad Azour, sat down with the checkpoints. Let's start from what we hear here in Georgia the most often after COVID-19 hit globally, and Georgia, of course, that Georgia is a small, open economy. So what is this economic toll of COVID-19 as seen by IMF on the region, and how that affects also Georgia and its outlook?
Of course, this crisis is like no other. It has affected most parts of the world, including Caucasus and Central Asia too. What one could say after 6 months of the outbreak is countries in the region, including Georgia, were able to contain and address waves of the shock of this COVID-19 that has not only affected the life of people, but also their livelihood. For an economy like Georgia that is open for trade, tourism, and part of the global value chain, this had an impact. We expect that growth this year will be negative for Georgia of -5%. And we think that next year the economy will rebound and we will have a positive 5% for the economy. Of course, this crisis has made some scars, especially in sectors like tourism and others. And this is where it's still important, on one hand, to maintain the support to lives and livelihoods, but also to start preparing for the recovery.
To what extent it is possible for Georgia, and what are some of the tough decisions that might be needed there? Because Georgia is relatively a poor country, and if not, IFI is including IMF, and thank you for that once again. This support, it would be really hard for Georgia to mitigate the impact of COVID-19.
Well, Georgia has introduced certain number of reforms in the past that allowed the Georgian economy to be stronger and to be more resilient, both in terms of level of growth, but also in terms of macroeconomic stability. And this is paid very well during the crisis because Georgia was able to weather those shocks, successive shocks, with a very limited impact on the economy. The fund is a partner And during this crisis, we have also provided additional financial support by augmenting the size of the program. Authorities have done the right measures, both in terms of protecting the society, also protecting the economy, and they have used both the government and the central bank the right policies to amortize or absorb part of the shock.
Mr. Azour, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What are some of the structural reforms that you see already in place that are helping this resilience, and what would IMF like to see more of in terms of structural reforms in Georgia?
Georgia has introduced important measures over the last decade and in the recent year in order to make the economy more competitive, improve the monetary policy tools and the financial sector strength, as well as also increase the level of investment and competitiveness in the economy. Going forward, where are the priorities? One is to address some of the scarring that the crisis has inflicted on the economy. Sectors like tourism, trade, logistics need some special attention, and this is something that important because of the importance of those sectors in terms of job creation. Macroeconomic stability is also critical for the future of the Georgian economy to allow the economy to keep attracting foreign direct investment, to maintain the level of growth at an acceptable level, and to reduce the level of risk. This is a second priority. A third priority is to understand what are the, I would say, the opportunities. Technology proved to be very important during this COVID-19 crisis. And therefore, any expansion of the role of technology in the economy would provide Georgia with additional comparative advantages that will allow the economy and the Georgian private sector to thrive going forward.
You mentioned macroeconomic stability, and one component there is definitely debt that Georgia has accumulated because of COVID-19. And also another driver, so to say, that is making things even more complicated is lari and its and the exchange rate. How is it possible to mitigate this risk, and what do you think Georgia should do to preserve this macroeconomic stability?
I think one should recognize that over the last 6 months, the authorities did the right things, both the government and the central bank, and the monetary policy that the central bank adopted. On one hand, protected and preserved the stability of the economy, and also provided the liquidity that the banking system needed in order to provide a lifeline and support to the private sector. Going forward, it's very important to preserve the macroeconomic stability and allow Georgia to become more competitive, and for that to have enough fiscal space to invest in infrastructure and increasing the quality of infrastructure, especially in technology, education. This is an important ambition that the Georgian authorities and Georgian government has. Those are the investments for the future. Improving these infrastructure will increase the level of competitiveness in the economy. Preserving the overall macroeconomic stability will maintain the level of inflation under control and will provide certain predictability for foreign investors to come and to contribute in the recovery of the Georgian economy. Last but not least, I think this crisis is about acceleration of certain trends. We saw that investing in technology is going to be a big differentiating factor in the future. Greening the investment or investing in technologies that improves climate, all those elements are going to be important in the future. And therefore, for Georgia is a country that has been in the forefront of reforms, it's very important to maintain the pace and to be ready for the second or the next generation of investment.
Are these ambitious goals really achievable looking forward? Because what I have noticed looking at different outlooks of different organizations like IMF, World Bank, ADB, all these are Fitch, one thing is clear, that the recovery in 2021 might not be as smooth and as fast as anticipated on the early stage of pandemic. Would you agree with that? Is that also what IMF sees looking forward at 2021?
Well, as you know, the level of uncertainty on the global economy is still high. And this depends on several factors. Risk of another wave of COVID, which we see in certain countries, including in Europe. How fast a vaccine can be developed and can be deployed. And also here we have some positive news. And also how the global recovery, what is going to be the shape of the global recovery. Therefore, this level of uncertainty requires to be vigilant and to make sure that the policies are well set. One is respond to any risk of second wave, protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. Two, repair sectors that were affected by the crisis, and for example, in the case of Georgia, sectors like tourism that are very rich in job creation need also some protection. And three is to also prepare for the recovery. Recovering is going to be the solution in order to address the impact that this crisis has inflicted for many years on the global economy and the economies of various countries, because it has led to an increase in debt, decline in growth, and also increase in the challenges for economies going forward, especially in sectors that are affected by the crisis.
Looking from this standpoint, Mr. Azour, would you say that it was a wise decision to lock down Georgia's economy on the early stage of COVID-19? Because being just a simple person living in Georgia, let us say it is quite unusual to understand why we couldn't go to the restaurants, to the gatherings when there were just, I don't know, a couple of cases in Georgia. And now when there's a lot, considering that we are just 3.5 million whole population of Georgia, and we have already more than 900 cases per day, there are no more talks about the lockdown. Would you say it was a wise decision to lock down on the early stage of pandemic?
This crisis is crisis like no other. Nobody was prepared for it. Research are showing that countries who have introduced early on measures to contain the spreading by using social distancing, tracing, testing, were able to reopen faster and to limit the impact of the shock on the economy. Of course, this is a global disease and global pandemic and requires global response. The only way to do it now is to use those type of measures. Before having a vaccine, it's still the best way to protect lives, which is the priority of any government, or should be the priority, is by using those measures. Of course, this in itself has an impact on the economy, and the economies of the world have suffered because of that. But I think it's very difficult to think otherwise. And also, plus, I think this had government and countries to develop, and this is where also technology is playing an important role, new approaches and new methodologies to, while protecting lives, affecting to a lesser extent economic activities and the livelihood of people.
Let us summarize. How does IMF support not only Georgian but whole region, considering that these countries are really interdependent on how they will perform in 2021 and beyond?
We have scaled up our financial assistance and in certain cases provided grants for low-income countries. We have also provided policy support because this is a new form of shock and countries needed to learn from each other, learn from the best knowledge in terms of how to address this shock. And we have also increased the level of dialogue at regional level. Next week we will have an important meeting with the decision makers from the region in order to discuss what are the challenges that are currently facing and the priorities. Also, we will have a meeting with the governors of central bank to understand what are the implications of this crisis on the stability of the banking system and what the central banks could do going forward. And as you know, we are developing a new center for technical assistance and capacity development that will play an important role in bringing the region together and providing the knowledge and support to countries of the region.
So this communication seems to be crucial in these uncertain times. Thank you so much for taking time and talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.